Today we're joined by and with JD.
Great to be here, Greg.
And
it's a privilege. Thanks for the opportunity.
Yeah, we're always glad to have you here, and we appreciate what you do for the kingdom for many, many years now. JD has been traveling the world over, and he is currently serving as the Director of International Initiatives for CSRM. And in that capacity, he gets to see a lot of different folks in a lot of different settings and has seen a lot of different models of sports ministry around the world. Now, of course, those of you that are familiar with us know that CSRM exists to really equip and empower, mobilize, resource the local church so that they can do their sports outreach, their fitness outreach, their recreation ministries. And today we want to talk about a specific thing that some of you that are local church, sports and rec fitness people, or maybe you're a pastor or a missions pastor that are watching this, and we want to give you some insights that we've found that work in terms of partnering stateside churches with churches in an international community. And JD has just all kinds of experience in that. And so if you could help explain, maybe if this church is watching this or listening to this, if they were interested in partnering with another church overseas, what are some just basic principles that they need to be aware of? How can they begin to condition their thinking and their people to know how to partner?
Yeah, that's a great question. As I have traveled around the world, literally, I can still honestly say that I believe the U.S. is the number one sending country in the world. And even as desperate as the situation of our church here is in North America, there's still so many churches involved in missions, involved in ministry around the world, with the right attitude and the right heart. I think genuinely most churches want to go and they want to serve and they want to make a difference. I think some of the challenges that I see that will lead to some of my suggestions would be that sometimes when we come from North America, we think that Jesus only comes with us and starts working once we get there. And then when we leave, we think he's leaving with us. And so
you're already probably stepping on a few toes.
Well,
but we need to step on those toes.
Right. And the reality is that because of the history of the church in North America, and even going back to colonial days, that there was not a lot of appreciation for the indigenous cultures and for the indigenous people.
Right.
And so even coming from the West today, or from the affluent churches, we think that we know how to do it all. And we come with an attitude that to serve, but it's, I'm going to serve in the way that I think is best.
Right.
And so I think the number one most important thing would be for churches who are looking to continue doing international missions is to ask questions from their international partners so that they can find out what it is they're actually doing, what kind of expertise do they have, and how can they really go and serve. And then come with a humble attitude as a learner, but also as someone who is then sharing their expertise, because our churches do have a lot of experience and they do have a lot to offer, but instead of thinking that we're the chosen ones and we're going in to save the heathens or whatever we would consider them, to recognize that God is already at work there, that God is already touching people's hearts, that God has already done something in the lives of many people, probably in that country, and that we just want to come in as partners to serve and to learn and then to give. And another thing that often happens is churches come in and they just can throw money at a problem and say, I'm going to raise funds and I'm going to give this to you for this specific need to build your church or to whatever they're asking for. And sometimes that's the right thing to do, but often giving money is the least effective thing, because it's that old adage, it's better to teach someone how to fish than to fish for them and just to
hand it over.
Yeah, just to hand it over, because when you're doing that, what's happening is you're developing a dependency. You're not really training them how to do it themselves, and you're not empowering them. And I think that's a key focus, that as we go into these kinds of opportunities and partnerships with churches, it becomes a mutual beneficial relationship, give and take, so that we're learning from them, they're learning from us. Maybe they don't have the financial resources that we do, but they certainly have a better understanding of what it means to effectively minister in their own culture, in their own country, because our teams going in don't live there. They don't know the day-to-day struggle, and the needs of the people are not the needs of the team, because the team is often coming from a more affluent, or at the least a different perspective, a different understanding,
right,
just because we're different cultures. So that would be a couple things that I would mention right
Well,
off.
that's really good stuff, JD, and we've come to understand that things need to be based theologically, and that theological foundation is probably 95% or more going to be the same around the world.
Right.
And what you're talking about talks about two of these ologies, missiology and soteriology. Missiology is what we need to go, we need to take and do a mission, but how do we do it? And then the soteriology fits into, what does it mean to actually become a Christian? What does it actually mean to be saved? What does it actually mean to become a disciple of Jesus? And so the next thing I'd like you to address is in that regard, because most Western churches, their missiology is verbal proclamation.
Right.
That they're going to go in and tell you about Jesus. And then they want you to raise your hand, fill out a card, walk
And then you're
forward.
in the club.
Yeah. And then that has to do with soteriology. And so these short-term missions, and here we go, we're going to step on some toes, we want to apologize, but we're trying to really help us conceptualize how to be not only strategic and relevant, but efficiently effective.
Exactly.
At the end, that this is really effective. Soteriology, and we say, do we need to go and just proclaim the gospel by who we are and what we do, and then have an opportunity possibly to affirm verbally what we have already proclaimed by what we've done?
Right.
And so I'm asking you now, in light of that, missiology and soteriology, if this church in the United States connects with somebody overseas, maybe what they really need to do is not go thinking that they're verbally proclaiming, but they are demonstrating the love of Christ. We've come to you, we've spent the money, we've taken the time out of our schedule, and what we want to do is come and serve. We're going to help. Maybe you need a facility built or refurbished. Maybe you need just volunteers to serve in some back ways.
But Greg, I really think it's a both and not an either or.
Go for it.
Because of course we have to go and we have to proclaim the message. And being a foreigner in a country often opens up doors that a national would not have.
Exactly.
So
Exactly.
it's proclaiming the gospel, but it's also doing this empowering of the local indigenous leaders that doesn't set them up for failure or doesn't put them in a position where their own ministry is compromised. Now, from my own experience...
And sometimes we compromise it.
Unfortunately, we do. And we create more of a hassle for them.
Long term.
Right, than is effective. And so, from my own experience, I... went on my first mission trip when I was 13 years old. And I was a part of a group of students from the South who went to Mexico, and we put a roof on some churches. And that was a great project. It was nice because our host needed that. Now they could have done that themselves, but we were able to do it and bring the funds and do it fast. But in reality, the trip was more for me and for those who went than it was for those I was going to serve. And it's a balance. It's not an either or. I'm not saying that is wrong, because that impacted my life in a tremendous way, and it also made an impact locally.
It was effective, but it could have been more effective.
Yeah, and I think the key is having a relationship with the local people so that you're empowering them.
Empowering
at the same time
them is the key.
them. Right. And so then let me share with you another story where I was taking this Western model of evangelism into a setting that was effective, but in the end it taught me a great lesson. I was with a small team some years ago, and we went to Rwanda in the central part of Africa. And we were there doing a sports ministry, playing games, doing sports, doing some training. And that was good. We were really empowering the locals, but we got invited to come to a prison. And so over the course of a day, we were able to share the gospel in many different settings, literally to a couple thousand prisoners that were
verbally.
Right, that were in this institution. And so by the end of the day, by their count, we had seen more than 600 prisoners make a profession of faith, to put their faith verbally and by indicating it in Jesus Christ, to trust Him as their Savior. Of course, we were really excited. God is really using us, and we were giving ourselves a pat on the back. Yeah, look at the great thing we've done. So as we're leaving the prison that day, I was talking to the chaplain, and the chaplain looks me in the eye, and almost with tears, he says, "I'm only one person, and I only have 2 or 3 volunteers. How am I going to follow up on 600 people? Mm-hmm. What can I do? Mm-hmm. I mean, maybe I can follow up with 10, 15, 20, but what about the 600? How am I going to help them to become followers of Jesus?" See, he understood this whole concept of evangelistic disciple making. Yeah. And we were still playing what I called the numbers game, where we go in and we put these notches in our belt because of all these people who've accepted Christ, and we dutifully report back and say, wow, look at what God has done. But how many of those people actually became followers of Jesus? And how many of the local people in that outreach were we empowering to do the ministry? And instead, I don't know that, we celebrate what God did, but at the same time, this chaplain expressed a truth that I just hadn't really grasped. And so it broke my heart as I think about it. And now, as we look at missions and we look at sending and we talk about developing ministry, we want to focus on ongoing ministry and multiplication. That again takes us back to 2 Timothy 2:2, where Paul is admonishing Timothy, these things you've heard me say, entrust to reliable men who are then able to teach others. That application of the truth that's been learned to then apply it and put it into practice. And so again, that's not to say that our going and proclaiming the gospel in the prison was not valuable. But I think what we hope that you're hearing is that we want to be more effective, or even most effective, when we talk about sending teams, because the impact of going is made on those who go. My life again was changed forever as I went, and so we don't want to minimize or belittle that reality. But the other side of it is we have to become more intentional about how we are going to train and equip the local believers so that they are truly built up, so that we don't develop a dependency, and so that there's really an ongoing commitment to ongoing ministry. And that takes relationships. And that takes time, and that takes commitment. And I think for many of our churches in the West, it takes a whole paradigm switch, a paradigm shift, a change that is more of an investment than just saying, I'm going to send this team and I'm going to send them with money, and then we're going to go and we're going to make an impact.
I'm going to circle back to how you started, because you said something to the effect that when we've got to see it from their perspective rather than from our perspective, and that pastor that's in that prison feels the burden now of all of that. And going into it, if we could have even have had that kind of an understanding before going into it, it may have helped a lot of things. But I for the folks that are out there listening and watching to this right now, Jonathan, I think the main thing that we're trying to communicate right in this particular podcast is that communication is never what's sent, it's what's received. And oftentimes we think we're doing this great thing, and in some ways we may be putting people in unhealthy situations or maybe even dangerous situations, and we may not be of as much help as they actually are in need of. And I heard you say it's a both and. But I think we have to be very careful about the proclamation being verbal on our part. It should only come at the invitation of our host.
Right.
And it should be filtered through with them. Now, it's probably even best when we need an interpreter. Most Americans, we only speak English. And there's a lot of other languages in the world. And so we can say something, and that interpreter can automatically say, well, I'm not saying that, but I understand what he's saying or she's saying, so now I'm going to say it in a way that our people can understand it. But nonetheless, if we think of it in that way, we need an interpreter. And so we need those folks to help us with that verbal proclamation, that it's heard in ways that will be received. And then we have to be prepared not only for that, but maybe we won't ever speak, but we can still proclaim with what we do. Right. Now we're down to our last couple minutes. Put a summary on this, and then we're going to share with folks what we're going to do in our next podcast.
Well, if I would evaluate that whole experience in Rwanda, I think the question in my mind is, okay, how could we have empowered this local chaplain to be more effective in his ministry? And of course, he invited us. He wanted us to come. So we did come. Then God moved in the hearts of many. But I think the area that we did not follow through on effectively is that we did not have a long-term vision to go back and serve him again. And we didn't talk with him afterwards and didn't ask him that question.
Yeah.
What do you need?
Ongoing relationship.
How can I serve you? How can I make your ministry more effective? And he told us at the end, but we were locked into how we thought the ministry should be. And we were locked into our own agenda.
Right.
And our own strategy, which we had been taught would be most effective.
Right.
And so I think, to summarize, as you talk about missions overseas, remember that you do have expertise to share.
Yes.
But it's not the only thing that's needed. Remember that there is a great impact in sending teams, but remember the greatest impact will be made as you build relationships and partnerships with the indigenous
and
leaders.
Empowering them.
And then, most effectively, if you can go in with an attitude of a learner that says, I want to learn from you, I know you want to learn from me, but I want to learn from you. How can I empower you to do your ministry most effectively? And then don't just let them speak, but listen.
Listen.
And as you listen, then pray and ask God, what is it you want me to take from this? And how can I really, in the most effective way, apply this to our partnership, our ongoing relationship, that then helps us to develop evangelistic, disciple-making strategies in such a way that will have the greatest impact in the local communities for the kingdom.
There's an old Scottish proverb that says, am I listening or am I waiting for you to be quiet?
And often we're waiting.
And that's what I hear you saying.
Exactly.
Well, we got to wrap this up right now. We thank you that you've joined on this Reach Extended podcast. And we're going to be going into our next podcast, and we're going to be giving more specifics of how your church could actually connect with a specific church overseas and how you can become more involved in that. We're going to be sharing a little bit about some of the things that we do, but we really thank you for joining us here.